Hey guys, it's me, Jessica, and this is my mockumentary. Please bear with me. I am losing my voice, so I just wanted to give a heads up to that. But let's get started. Alrighty. Have you ever felt feelings of jealousy? Have you ever wanted to act on those feelings? Well, no. Shame on you. Don't act on those feelings. Because if you act on those feelings, you will end up like our buddy Othello right there. And I don't think anyone wants that because not only did he kill himself, but he killed his wife. But if you're into that, then this might be the video for you. Now, going into my thesis, Shakespeare uses the character Othello to develop the theme jealousy by demonstrating what jealousy can lead to, such as the downfalls of characters. Shakespeare develops this at the end, especially with Othello. So, he uses literary devices such as imagery and metaphor to emphasize his point. Some of the characters used are obviously the main character, Othello, which Othello at the beginning of the story is this heroic general who, wants to do good by the city and he wants to love his wife, Desdemona, and he's so devoted to her. But, there's obviously a shift in the story because it's Shakespeare. And some of the other characters, Iago is the instigator, the master manipulator of our story. And of course, Desdemona is a loving wife to Othello who only wants to demonstrate her love to Othello, and she's just this caring, nurturing person. Moving on, Cassio is the innocent second right hand man to Othello, who is later on framed, but at the end of the story is our hero in a way. Emilia is Iago's clueless wife, so I emphasize the parentheses. um, Rodrigo is helplessly in love with Desdemona and would do anything such as even murder or get someone fired for her love and approval. We don't really need to worry about Barbanita. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, or Bianca, because they're not really what characters are going to prove my point here. But some of the oh my gosh, excuse me, literary elements used are foreshadowing. Shakespeare uses foreshadowing throughout the story, but an example of foreshadowing is when Othello is talking to Iago about the accusation he made against Desdemona on page 144, when he says, "Thinkst thou I'd make a life of jealousy?" It's basically like Othello saying to Iago, like, why? Well, my interpretation of it is, why would I devote my life around jealousy, which is later on ironic because he quite literally kills his wife because he's jealous. But moving on to my next point is the handkerchief. I didn't really feel like I needed to mention all the pages that it's mentioned in because it's mentioned quite frequently, sorry, throughout the story, but its mention begins in Act 3, Scene 3, when Othello asks for proof, and Iago brings up, like, oh, well, we found this in Cassio's room, which obviously is not true, but it, builds, it's the center around Othello's jealousy because it's literally quite the artifact that sets him off. Another example of elements used is imagery when him and Othello are discussing, like, how he feels about this, and Iago mentions the green-eyed monster, which is kind of ironic a little bit because Iago's quite literally acting on the green-eyed monster, but it's mentioned in page 142, and it's kind of like Iago in a way saying, like, oh, like, I don't think you should, like, act upon these feelings, like, trying to, like, look out for his friend, which we all know he's not. But yeah, it's kind of demonstrating, like, it makes you imagine, like, oh, the green-eyed monster, which is, I have a photo right there. But lastly, the last element used is metaphor, and this is when Emilia and Desdemona are talking about the accusations that Othello has made against Desdemona, and she's basically saying that jealousy is a monster, and it kind of like it's born upon the person's actions is my interpretation of it. So let me read out the quote aloud. It is a monster begot upon itself, born on itself, which again, like I said, it's kind of like I feel like this action is only basically what she's trying to say is um, when these actions are acted upon, it creates a monster. Now, moving on to Othello's jealousy, basically, at the beginning of the story, like I mentioned earlier, we see this well developed man who is basically like a hero, and all he wants to do is protect his city and like love his wife and prove that um, he's a loving husband to Desdemona's dad. But it isn't until Act 3, Scene 3, where we begin to see a spiral, and he's now acting like a jerk to Desdemona, and he's like, oh, like, you're a cheater, this and that. But it's kind of like I mentioned earlier, the handkerchief is this huge thing that sets him off and causes him to just spiral. An example of this that I thought was when he's basically like accusing Desdemona and asking her a whole bunch of questions, and he says, "What? Not a whore?" And my interpretation of that is kind of like sarcastic in a way. Like he's like, "Oh, like shut up, like you're not a whore," like basically dismissing everything that she said, like her logical explanation. And Othello is just purely driven off his jealousy to the where he's like, shut up, like, you know, you're a blank. I feel bad saying the word, but that's what I get from it. And I just think jealousy makes him a madman. Like, obviously, like, not only does he kill himself, but again, he kills his wife, and he's kind of responsible for the other deaths in the story. Like Emilia, you know, Emilia's just trying to protect Desdemona, and she like obviously takes a hit for it. And another example is Rodrigo, since Rodrigo kind of wants to like, well, it's not necessarily like Othello's fault, but in a way it kind of is, because he's so driven on this like feelings of action that like Iago's like, oh no, like I can't have like him find out, you know, if that makes sense. Now, moving on to my mock argument. For my argument, I interviewed my friend Isaiah, and I just thought text messages would be a creative way since we didn't have like a time slot for it. We couldn't work with each other's schedules, but let me read the text messages. How do you feel about jealousy? I feel it is a very corrupt feeling, but it can be controlled sometimes, and it can be necessary depending on how you view it. Do you think it can control someone? Yes, of course. Over time, your thoughts corrupt your mind. Having too many jealous thoughts is poisoning your brain. Do you think it can lead to you Do you think it can lead you to do crazy things? I think it can tempt or push someone to do crazy things, but ultimately it is a person who is in control of their actions. If it's good or bad, it is on them, not the jealousy. Have you ever felt jealous, and have you ever acted upon those feelings? I have felt jealous before. I didn't act in any way. Of course, I had thoughts and wishes for way things were gonna go, but it was not in my control, and my actions could have led to a different outcome than what it is now. Do you think that jealousy could lead to a downfall? I think it could lead to someone's rock bottom, or a point where the pink between a good or a bad path. Sorry, pick. I misread that, but that was my mock argument, and it kind of supports my thesis a little bit, because yes, like if you act upon those feelings, it obviously is going to cause you to downfall, like just like Othello did. Now for my counter argument. Although many might argue that Othello's downfall was due to Iago's manipulation and not the jealousy of Othello, which is understandable because in a way, a little bit, Iago's own jealousy of Othello is due to the promotion he received, and also the promotion that Cassio received, because, you know, Iago felt the entitlement that he should have gotten it, so now he's going to do everything in his power to destroy Othello's life, like, because in a way he feels that his life was destroyed. Um, an example of this like starting up is on page 2 when Iago and Rodrigo are discussing, and Iago says, I do hate him, and I feel like that's the start of it. And a couple pages later, I believe it's page 5 or page 6, that they come up with this plan to take down Iago, and then that's when truly the manipulation begins. Now, for my special guest, my interview with Professor Passerini. Unfortunately, I did not get her face, but I got the ceiling, so let's enjoy that. Alrighty, now moving on back to my presentation. Oh my goodness, why is it? Sorry. I would just like to bring attention to jealousy. Um, I think it's a very important subject that it needs to be touched on a little bit more because I feel like jealousy is honestly a feeling that a lot of us feel, and sometimes if taken in the wrong way, it can cause us to do things that like are not gonna end with good results. Kind of like Othello, like he was so driven by jealousy that it caused him to kill his wife and kill him, and that kind of like caused a downfall. Like he had like all this, like he had so many great things going, like he was a sergeant, he was like on top of the world, he had a beautiful wife, but he threw it all away because he was jealous. And I just think that's something that we should pay more attention to, because honestly it could happen to anyone. Like you could just snap in a matter of seconds and it can cause you to do things that are not going to have a good result, like I said. But that, which is why I want to bring attention to it, because we need to stop letting our feelings of jealousy take over us.